Welcome everyone to the July 5th, 2023
Recording in progress.
Special Board of Aldermen meeting. Would everybody please join with me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Alderman Plufka.
Here.
Alderwoman Tice.
Here.
Alderwoman Sims.
She's online. She was
Was.
online.
Not on there right now. Okay. Alderman Weggie.
Here.
Alderman Gould.
Here.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill. Alderman Shelton.
Here.
7 of 8 members are present.
Great, thank you. First item up is the approval or amendment of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Any objection to approving same by acclamation? Seeing none, will be so approved. Thank you. Next up is a public hearing. I am going to gavel. I will open up the public hearing for the related to Chapter 353 Urban Redevelopment Plan. The Board of Aldermen in the City of Brentwood will hold a public hearing pursuant to Chapter 353 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri and Ordinance Number 4302 of the city as amended to consider the approval of the proposed Manchester Road Corridor Redevelopment Area Development Plan. With that, Joel, if you'd like to start off with your presentation, please.
Magical. Sorry, bear with me. That's it.
Before you start, Joel, Alderwoman Sims is now with us. Do you need any indication that she's under roll call, or are we good to go?
I have
Okay.
3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm here.
Well, hello, everyone. We're really happy to be back in front of you this evening advancing this project. It's been a fruitful year as we've progressed with what this plan looks like. We were really happy with what we presented in our initial RFP response and feel like through the collaboration it's turned into an even better plan, and we're thrilled about that. So thank you for having us here. This is the previous plan that was reviewed a couple weeks ago at the June 23rd 353 hearing. It's what's online, it's what's in the public record, it's everywhere else. One reason we believe that you all have so far chosen to want to work with Green Street is our intentionality around respecting people's voices. We were thrilled that the city had engaged the public so much before you even went out to the development world. We believe that's the right way to do it. Most cities don't because it's much harder to do that way. So when we responded, we were attempting a year ago to be respectful of the vision that the city, your constituents, then PGAV put all together. And we believe that we've done that throughout this process. With the goal and the commitment of continuing to do that until this entire wonderful project is delivered. The market is very hard right now in general for all facets of real estate. Things are changing. The office culture has changed. The way that people use office space has changed. And one great question that was brought up at the 353 hearing is we were probably missing the incredible opportunity to maximize the entrance to the park on the southwest corner of the site. And we heard that feedback. We digested that feedback. And have been working through how exactly do we process that feedback. So we're going to present a slightly tweaked plan tonight that really doesn't change the overall kind of macro numbers of the project, but moves things around a little bit. So we're excited to show you that. So this is the plan that was at June 23. It looks like a very small change in that southwest corner where that building is. And on a piece of paper it is. In reality, it's a huge change that we're really excited about. So back to the old plan, what you saw there was this box that was a little bit less discriminate, kind of mixed-use commercial concept. And then we had added in the beer garden to the south of that right here, if you can see where the cursor is swirling around. We believe that was a step in the right direction, but didn't get us fully there. So this building you see here is the same size. That's why the overall square footage stays the same. But this is now programmed as a destination entertainment concept. As we've talked about multiple times, we do have an affiliated company that runs facilities like this. The Armory is an example of that. There's a lot of different ways it can look. But we believe by having that kind of lunch to dinner to evening, kind of multifaceted entertainment really draws people to the park and really kind of creates that connectivity. So we're really excited about that. So this plan that you see still has 30 condominium units, 136 hotel rooms, 490 market rate apartments, 170 age-restricted 55 plus units, 120,000 square feet of office space, 184,331 square feet of commercial space, and 2,316 parking spaces. So that's all great to have said to you, but we thought it would be a little better to do this short animation. It's about 2.5 minutes. I'm gonna talk while we watch this. This is out in the public ether on the city's website, so people can watch it at their leisure. So the park space we see that is in place, and then you saw as the 3 phases, I guess, phased into the drawing. This gives a better sense of scale as to what exactly we're proposing. So the 2 blue buildings are the office buildings. The 3 larger yellow buildings are the multifamily buildings. The 3 smaller yellow buildings are the condo buildings. The green building is the hotel. The first linear building that we talked about is the destination entertainment. And the other, I would say, orange-ish buildings are a mix of retail, service, restaurant, food and beverage. Give us a second to go so people can absorb what you're saying. Through the iterations of the process, we learn new information all the time. As the city has progressed, for instance, with MSD, you now see on the southeast corner, those are the MSD facilities that are in place now that were not really a known quantifiable thing a year ago. So hence the plan has to adjust and grow over time. Our continued conversations with the city's engineers and attorneys on the flood map progress, every iteration of information informs what we're able to do and actually execute on. We believe that the new internal road that parallels Manchester is a key component of the project to kind of pull cars off of Manchester, help with traffic flows, help with traffic patterns, and create a better user experience. We very intentionally don't show materiality when you're looking at buildings at this level because we've had in the past where people will not like the color of a brick in a picture, which right now we want people focused on the concepts and the uses that we're attempting to be delivered. So we feel very excited how this has evolved over time, even though if you compared the initial RFP response to this plan, they're shockingly similar. But the small changes matter a lot, and we believe that this is a great plan that's very executable and will be a huge benefit to the city, the county, and the region. I think. And it phases out. Try to switch back. The presentation also has some of those still shots from the presentation so people can see those statically and be able to print those, etc. We wanted to recreate and represent this table because it was in the original RFP response, so people wanting to compare side by side programming uses, square footages, dollar amounts, etc., that it was in a comparable format. This is a timeline of where we've been and where we believe we'll go. The current trajectory of the flood maps is what has informed that timeline. These are some concepts of what destination entertainment can be. We wanted to present that since we hadn't kind of openly discussed that before. There are a couple of different options that our group, it's called Brick and Bev, would engage in a deep market analysis of what would be the most beneficial to the community. Some of the options you're seeing on this has things like pickleball courts, has things like outdoor recreational games, interior recreational games, There is a potential dog park component if that's something that made sense to the community over time. They have that flexibility, which we believe is really important to do what makes the most sense. It's not a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all approach by any means. And this is the beer garden that's in South City in Francis Park. This particular location is run by Rockwell Beer. We did not have anything to do with this project, but we think it's a great execution of how you can kind of leverage that community gathering space with a parks department in a way that cities can't traditionally do. So that is the presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hold off on the board asking any questions at this point. I'd like to instead to complete the rest of the presentation. So next up would be the tax impact analysis. So Lindsay, if you would just identify yourself and let people know who you're with.
Hello, I am Lindsay Evans with PGAV Planners, and let me pull up the next version of the presentation here. Great. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the next section of the presentation is to discuss the incentive package that is part of the overall development plan. And a portion of that incentive package includes a property tax abatement. Sorry, there's a warning on the screen here. Let me, if I can get rid of that. Okay. So part of the incentive package includes a property tax abatement, and as part of the development plan, there was a tax impact statement that was prepared by Development Strategies and reviewed by PGAV as well as the larger development group, and that estimates the overall impact on each real property and commercial surcharge taxing district. That analysis was included as part of the 353 meeting, and it does not include an impact on personal property tax revenues, sales taxes, or any other tax types. It compares a build versus no build scenario to look at what would be abated with a build scenario and what would still be collected by the taxing jurisdictions if the build scenario went forward. And it analyzes the net new revenues to each of the taxing districts as part of that analysis. So that was included as part of the overall development plan. The larger incentive package, in addition to the tax abatement, includes a 1% CID sales tax plus a 1% TDD sales tax, which is a combined 2% CID and TDD. And that's an additional tax beyond the existing taxes in the area. It also includes a CID special assessment, a Chapter 100 sales tax exemption on construction materials, a $1 million public land acquisition cost for all developable parcels owned or to be conveyed to the city, and a clawback provision at year 5 as a sort of checks and balances. And again, that tax impact statement that was prepared by Development Strategies does not include the CID, TDD, and special assessment analysis because they're new taxes, not an impact on existing taxes. And that incentive package that we're focusing on is the 20-year property tax abatement, which includes the developer paying on the residential property 25% in years 1 through 10 and 50% years 11 through 20. And on commercial property, it's 50% for the entire years 1 through 20. And this is the full package of incentives beyond just the 353 tax impact statement. PGAV looked at the overall development plan and the incentive package and analyzed that in order to determine whether this project needed incentives. In order for this project to be feasible, these incentives allow for a reasonable rate of return for the risks associated with the development. And those developer risks are land acquisition, timeline, and cost. There were many other considerations around this land that included needing the land to be acquired by the city in whole. But because that land acquisition is the responsibility of the developer, that increases their risk because of the unknown timeline and the cost. The environmental remediation of the land and the buildings, basically the buildings and the land need to be cleaned up. There's a number of environmental conditions that will need to be addressed after acquisition. And the public infrastructure that's part of the development, the roads and sidewalks and utilities that will need to be upgraded as part of the project are all included in the developer risks. And these incentives that have been analyzed as part of this project are common tools in Brentwood and the region and have resulted in prior successes. We looked at the value of incentives and the timeline associated with those incentives. So the 20-year timeline is important to incorporate a variety of incentives. So when we're looking at the tax abatement mixed with the CID and TDD, that 20-year timeline of combining them all is an important aspect. This request for 20 years is less than the statute allows. So the statute could allow a 25-year request, but the developer is only requesting 20 years. And this is an ambitious, large-scale project, and the incentive request is still within the standard range in this region. So on other similar scale projects, there's a standard range, and with this being an ambitious, large-scale project, this incentive request fits into that range. The value of the property tax abatement and combined 2% CID TDD equates to 18% of the $425 million total development cost of the project. So the developer is currently estimating a total development cost of $425 million for the entirety of the project, and 18% of that is the value of this incentive package. That includes the property tax abatement, which is addressed in the tax impact statement, as well as that combined 2% additional sales tax as part of the CID and TDD. And that incentive package analysis summarizes into the additional considerations that we took a look at. The taxing districts will not receive less revenue from this area than what they are currently receiving. The current draft of the development agreement addresses a developer paying the greater of, which is a really great benefit to the city to make sure that the revenue will not be decreased for this area. The abatement request is able to be lower because the other incentives are included. So the CID and TDD, as well as the construction sales tax exemption being included in the incentive package, mean that the abatement request doesn't have to be as high. And that incentive package increases the project feasibility. It spreads the cost impact to those visiting the community in addition to the residents in the community, and it minimizes the costs for the residents and the local taxing districts because these other pieces are included in the incentive package. In summary, the package provides for a cohesive district approach to development, a balanced approach to the risks and rewards for all stakeholders, and an incentive package that is appropriate for the scope and impact of this project.
Thank you, Lindsay. And the last presenter, I believe, is Mark Grimm.
Good evening. I'm Mark Grimm with Gilmore and Bell, special counsel to the city on this project. So I've been asked to just make a couple references to the development plan and the blight analysis within that plan, and then kind of give an overview of the redevelopment agreement. And so to put this in context, the development plan really provides the framework under which the redevelopment agreement can be adopted. The development plan itself doesn't confer any rights on the developer. That's only done through the redevelopment agreement. So the development plan, as you know, included a detailed analysis of the factors that qualify the area as a blighted area under the statute. So in reviewing the development plan and reviewing the blight analysis, it's important to remember that the statutory definition of blight is broader than many of us think, broader than the ordinary connotation of that term. So to supplement the blight study, including the development plan, do we have that map, Bola? Up there? Okay. Oh, okay. Not showing the bottom part of that. I'll talk while this is loading. So this map, there you go, which PGAV prepared shows, puts into or graphic or illustrates the factors that are referenced in the development plan. So it helps put the information in the blight analysis into context in an easy to see form. And so this shows which parcels meet the statutory criteria in PJV's opinion for being blighted. And then it also calculates the percentage. And so PJV has concluded that 48 of the 75 parcels overall, or approximately 63% of the overall area, is blighted within the meaning of the statute. And then when you exclude the city parcels, so of the privately owned property, 43 of the 49 parcels meet the definition of blight under the statutes. So I'm going to now talk for just hit a couple highlights on the redevelopment agreement. The redevelopment agreement again essentially says if Green Street does this, then here's what the incentives that Green Street will receive. Okay, so there are no incentives without performance. And so if Green Street builds buildings within the time, acquires property, builds buildings within the time frames prescribed, then they will have the right to receive tax abatement. If they do not perform within the time prescribed, then they will not receive tax abatement, okay? So if they undertake phase one, but never do phases 2 and 3, they will retain the incentives for phase 1, but will not receive any incentives for subsequent phases. Green Street is required to offer option agreements to all the property owners within phase 1 within 60 days after execution of the redevelopment agreement, and to make offers to all of the remaining property owners within 18 months after the execution of the redevelopment agreement. Green Street is required to use its best efforts to acquire all of the property by negotiation, but the redevelopment agreement does, if that fails, the redevelopment agreement allows for the acquisition by condemnation pursuant to ordinance of the Board of Aldermen. Some of the deadlines in the agreement are that Green Street must acquire all of the property within phase 1 by January 30, 2025, so about a year and a half from now, subject to events of force majeure, acts of God. And for the property in additional phases, that's extended to July of 2028. The agreement requires that the project be conceptually as shown in the site plan that you were shown. So it's got that site plan attached as an exhibit, and the agreement says Green Street will submit plans that are conceptually consistent with that. There's standards for the hotel that Joel referenced, that it must be an upscale hotel unless otherwise approved by the Board of Aldermen. Examples of upscale hotels include AC Hotels by Marriott, Courtyard, DoubleTree, Hyatt Place, so there's a third-party standard for that. The redevelopment agreement requires that space be set aside for a police substation within the development as well as UTV storage. Lindsay referenced the tax abatement that would be provided for completed buildings. Just briefly, the way the clawback works that she referenced is that at the 5-year mark, if a building has been sold, then we would compare the sale price of that building to the total project cost of that building. And so if the sale price exceeds the project cost by more than 20%, then there would be a reduction in the amount of the tax abatement. And if there's not a sale within 5 years, then there would be an appraisal of the building to get to that same result. And that's the same, essentially the same process as followed by the city of St. Louis on tax abatement projects. I guess most importantly, I just want to reiterate that if the developer does not perform, then there are no incentives provided for any subsequent phases. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Mark. The first question I have for you is, how long have you been an attorney?
More than 30 years.
More than 30. And is this your first redevelopment agreement that you've negotiated?
No, it's not. I spent about half my time doing economic development incentives. So I've represented a number of cities, many cities in eastern Missouri.
And is this the first time you've ever negotiated a redevelopment agreement on behalf of the city of Brentwood?
No, I think I've been involved in each of the prior, many of the prior redevelopment agreements that the city has done.
Were you involved in the Brentwood Square redevelopment?
I was involved in Brentwood Square, the Deerbergs project, Promenade, Hanley Eager project, the hotel, Hanley Station, among others.
So clearly this isn't your first rodeo.
I've been around the block a few times.
Okay. I just want to put this all into context for people who might be watching and people who are here tonight, just to kind of give a little timeline. I'm not going to go too long. I know there's some older people who think I speak a lot, so I'm going to try and keep it short. But again, just to kind of provide a background to this, in August of last year, August 15th, we presented to the Board of Aldermen a resolution to appoint Green Street as the preferred master developer. Instead of voting on it that night, the board decided to hold off on that in order to permit Green Street to have a workshop for the public, for the residents, for ward meetings to take place, and to have more communication with the residents. And at that time, I commended them for doing that, for allowing a lot of public input. In September, the board did vote on appointing Green Street as the preferred master developer. And then the next step was to negotiate a redevelopment agreement, and that was back in September. And so we put together our team, and our team consisted of our city administrator, Bola Kande, who has a lot of experience doing this, our director of planning, Whitney Kelly, the mayor, our city attorney, Kevin O'Keefe, who I believe has practiced a little bit longer than Mark Grimm, but I'm not sure of that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But he's been involved in a lot of these types of negotiations. And then obviously we had Mark Grimm, and you've heard about his kind of experience in doing this. And I want to stress that Mark represents the city. He is our attorney. He's not the attorney for Green Street. They have their own attorney. And that attorney, their attorney, looks out for Green Street and makes sure that that any agreement has the items in there that are necessary to protect Green Street. Mark's job is to do that for the city. There was one last person that I wanted to put on the negotiation team, and against the advice of some, I suggested that we have a representative from the Board of Aldermen sit on this. And the reason for that is I wanted to get some input from an alderman during these negotiations. I wanted the alderman to hear directly from Green Street. I didn't want there to be any misunderstanding or thought that maybe when I come back and I bring back where we are in this, that they might not believe me, they might not believe our city administrator. So I wanted them to be a witness to the negotiation. And so I made the appointment of Alderman Weggie with the approval of the rest of the board. So that made up our negotiation team. And we've had numerous meetings since September at the offices of Green Street. Green Street has come here, had meetings here. We've had meetings with just our team. We've had, there might have been just meetings between our attorneys and Green Street's attorneys. So it has taken a very, very long time to get to this point where we have a redevelopment agreement, which we are now bringing to the board for their approval. And quite frankly, it's a contract. It's that simple. There's nothing magical about it. There are a lot of terms in there, and it sets out the parties' obligations and what rights that they have if it's approved. This redevelopment agreement needs approval by the board, and if passed, the bill would become an ordinance. In order to have an ordinance, there has to be 2 readings. And our city attorney could give you more information on that process. But you could have 2 readings at one meeting. We're not going to do that. We normally don't do that. We normally stagger our readings, meaning we have a first reading at one meeting and then a second reading at a subsequent meeting, the next scheduled meeting. And the reason for that, it gives the board an opportunity to digest what is being proposed in the bill. It also gives the public an opportunity to weigh in if they so choose. I said this at the last Board of Aldermen meeting, but I think it's worth repeating that my plan, my schedule here in bringing this to the board was not to hold a special Board of Aldermen meeting tonight. Originally, I was going to have a first read. Remember, we have a first and second read. I was going to do the first read on July 17th, a regularly scheduled Board of Aldermen meeting, and then have the second read in August, the August 20th, regularly scheduled Board of Aldermen meeting. Now, in the summer, Brentwood goes from 2 meetings a month to 1 meeting a month. So normally we have a meeting on the first Monday and the third Monday. But again, in the summertime, we have them every month. So that was the schedule. And if you were at the meeting, the Board of Aldermen meeting last month, or if you watched it, if you attended the Coffee with the Mayor, you heard that we are losing 2 aldermen. We're losing Alderman Shelton and Alderwoman O'Neill, and because they're moving. Alderwoman O'Neill is moving to Colorado, and Alderman Shelton is moving to another ward. And because they will now no longer live in Ward 4, they cannot vote and represent the residents of Ward 4. So their last meeting is going to be July 17th. And they told me about that last month. And that kind of obviously threw a wrench in the scheduling for this. So I was presented with the following 2 choices. One was to have a second read on July 17th or have a second read after July 17th. My problem with the latter is if I wait until after July 17th, then Ward 4 has essentially been disenfranchised because they don't have any aldermen. It'd be one thing if they were only losing 1 alderman, but they're losing both. So after July 17th, they have nobody to speak on their behalf. Contrast that with the situation of, I know some people have said this is being rushed and it would be better to wait. Again, I had the choice on this, and my choice was to have a second read on July 17th. If you have a problem with that, take it up with me. It's not their fault. And so I think it's more important that all 4 wards have representation in voting on this agreement which is without a doubt the biggest item to come before the city of Brentwood in its history. And to disenfranchise an entire ward, I think, is a disservice to them. So that's where we are. That's why we're doing it this way. So with that, I will now open up to the board questions on the presentation.
Would you prefer that aldermen ask questions now or when it comes up in the
Whichever you prefer.
Because I mean, this is a public hearing,
Right.
and a chance for folks.
Right, no, we're gonna allow the public
So
to.
I do have one question. Well, it's sort of a two-part question. It's for Lindsay, actually. There she is. In your presentation, you had said it was important to remember that the CID and the TDD and the abatements are all together, and that they're all three intertwined. Is that in part because that's one of the incentives why we're not doing 25 years of abatement but only 20? Is that what you meant by that?
So there's a lot of different ways that those could all be combined together, and they basically outweigh each other, right? So the developer is looking to finance the project in a way that creates feasibility with equity and debt, and they can do that in a number of ways. The amount that is currently being estimated for the CID and TDD is balancing with the amount of tax abatement that is coming out of 20 years of tax abatement. So certain things could go up or down. It doesn't necessarily need to be the tax abatement going up to 25 years, but yes, they all outweigh each other.
Okay. And so thank you for that. And my second question had to do with the description, and I thought I understood what was going on here, but maybe I don't. The abatement and the payments that come in the first, second, third years of after the development, you made it very clear, and it's very clear in what you've written that there's a floor that's set in terms of tax being collected, and that it really can't go down. Does that extend throughout the entirety of the abatement of 20 years, or just for the first 10 years?
Sure. So, Mr. Graham, if you want to check me on this, yes, it extends through the entire abatement period. I think, okay, I was waiting for you to find it in your notes. Yes, that is part of the development agreement, redevelopment agreement. So Mr. Graham would be better at opining on that, but yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Alderman Gould.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to reserve most of them for when we take this up in new business. But since you're up here, I did have one question as it related to the CID and TDD. There didn't seem to be language in the redevelopment agreement about any sunset clause or anything like that on the CID, TDD. Is it accurate to assume that because it's a contract and when the contract terminates, those CID and TDDs also terminate?
That's also a question for Mr. Grimm, who is negotiating that agreement.
If you could, just come on down, Mark, so we can get it on the record. Thank you.
Statutorily, a CID can't last for more than 27 years. Okay, so we know no CID will be for more than 27 years. Statutorily, a TDD could be for longer, but from a financing standpoint, the developer won't receive, if they're securitizing that revenue stream, it's not worth very much at the long end. So typically, we haven't discussed, I haven't seen a draft petition, but I would expect it to be 40 years is pretty standard.
40 years is when they can statutorily
Yeah,
keep it
but keep in mind, the document does say, once your project costs have been paid, then they have to terminate the CID and the
Okay.
TDD.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Alderman Weggie.
Make sure I understood that. So the CID and the TDD are not a defined length. It's till the initial costs are paid off. That's when they terminate.
That's correct. The redevelopment agreement does obligate the developer to terminate the CID and TDD once the project costs have been paid.
Okay, and then on the beginning, I know the abatement is per parcel. So upon the acquisition, that's when the abatement clock starts. What about when does the CID and the TDD start? Is that going to be specific to a proposal or a phase that's in the proposal?
Yeah, the redevelopment agreement allows for the creation of multiple CIDs and TDDs rather than there likely would not be a single large CID and TDD because they're likely going to want to do them in connection with different phases. Okay, so once they have land control, then they likely would create a CID or a TDD for that property.
Okay, and I guess it doesn't matter when it starts because it's only when sales tax starts being collected
That's
in
right.
the
That's right.
phase that's really what matters.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Sims, is your hand up?
It is both as an icon and raised actually. I have a few questions. I think Mark would probably be the one to field them. The first one I have about the agreement. Can you talk about the interplay between the developer and the sub-developer and the carve out of that relationship? And would we face a situation in which a sub-developer comes along and swallows this agreement and we're dealing with someone else?
Well, I'll give you an example. Is for the hotel, and Green Street has used this example. Green Street is not a hotel developer, and so Green Street has discussed with a hotel developer the development of that hotel, and so we would expect to have a separate parcel development agreement among the city, Green Street, and the hotel developer, where the hotel developer acknowledges the abatement that developer would receive on the hotel project and would be responsible for carrying out that portion of the project. We expect that Green Street is going to carry out many, if not most, probably most of the remaining elements of the project. Maybe not the office buildings, for example, but there's going to be a parcel development agreement on every parcel, but many of those agreements will be two-party agreements between the city and the developer, Green Street, and a few of those agreements may be tri-party agreements between or among the city, Green Street, and hotel developer or office developer. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Just that Green Street will still have a hand in this, even though there's a prospect for a particular parcel or area of this agreement of a sub-developer coming in. Green
Right.
Street's still in.
Green Street will, we were actually called this a master redevelopment agreement because they're going to be the master developer responsible for the cohesiveness and overall responsibility for the entire area.
Okay, thank you. So that's my first question. My second.
If I may, could I ask, excuse me, Alderwoman Sims,
Is your
could I
mic on,
ask
Kevin?
Mr. Grimm to clarify one thing? A sub-developer doesn't get any relief from the obligations of the master development agreement. They will have to assume all responsibilities under this agreement. They don't get any different deal, correct?
Right.
And Green Street continues to be responsible to see to it that all the terms of the development agreement are fulfilled.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. My next topic area is I noticed in the agreement that there is a new redevelopment corporation being formed, the Manchester Corridor 353. Why is that being set up as opposed to just running to the extent to which it's called upon to not use the Brentwood redevelopment corp?
Yeah, and so I will say that's customary, and you're right that they could have used the existing Brentwood Redevelopment Corporation. Redevelopment Corporation under the statute, title each time before abatement begins on any given parcel, title has to pass through the redevelopment corporation or a redevelopment corporation. And it doesn't have any long-term role in the development. That's only the developer. So from an administrative ease standpoint, it's customary on developer-driven projects to create a project-specific redevelopment corporation. So that, when they're passing title through the redevelopment corporation, they don't have to worry about, from a timing standpoint, convening all the members of the Brentwood Redevelopment Corporation. They can literally, title is going to pass in and out through that redevelopment corporation. And so this is the same way, for example, that the Mullinex project was done on Hanley Road.
So is it true that even though we're forming this new Redevelopment Corp. Ultimate decision-making, to the extent we need to rely on that entity, will be before the board, right?
Well, yeah, so the Brentwood Redevelopment Corporation has made its recommendation to the Board of Aldermen with respect to approval of the development plan. And now, under your code, they have no further obligations or responsibilities with respect to this project.
Okay, that answers my questions on that topic. And the last topic I have is, can you talk about the extent to which the city has control, input, the monitoring abilities with regard to the prospect of eminent domain with regard to these properties that are in this region? I mean, how are we going to be able to move along with Green Street as these? I mean, I know that's not the first lever to pull, but if it becomes something, what control do we have with that?
Well, the city does have control because under the statutes, condemnation, if it is used, is in the name of the city, not in the name of the developer. The developer cannot, of its own volition, initiate condemnation. Developer, that can only be done by ordinance of the Board of Aldermen. And so, if the redevelopment agreement and state law set out certain conditions that have to be satisfied prior to use of condemnation by anybody, by any governmental entity. And so the redevelopment agreement says, if Green Street demonstrates to the Board of Aldermen's satisfaction that they have met the various state law and redevelopment agreement obligations and have been unsuccessful in obtaining property through negotiation, that the board can initiate condemnation. But ultimately, that's a decision for the Board of Aldermen.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions before we open? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Alderman Gould.
I did have one more question, Mark, that you're probably best suited to answer since we're on this. The Chapter 100, does it mean, the way that it's written in the redevelopment agreement, does it mean that the Chapter 100 is only applied to each parcel and improvement during construction phase? Or can that be leveraged like post-construction after it's complete?
Yeah, it is limited to sales tax exemption on construction materials. So the way this is typically structured, and the way the document provides here, is that as a project is ready to be developed, the city would allow the use of the city's project exemption certificate so as to, so Green Street or any subdeveloper can avail itself of the statutory exemption for construction materials for that project. So once a building is done, there's no other use of Chapter 100.
So even though they may have parcels next to it or within the same phase actively in construction, any materials after a building is completed, say, for example, there's something that needs to be done and there's a redesign in a building, but it's already complete, and they need to replace a bunch of sinks, let's say. Technically, they couldn't really do that under that one.
The redevelopment agreement contemplates it on initial construction of a building.
Initial construction.
And it'd be on a parcel by parcel basis.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that would require further action by the board as well.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, now it's time to open this up for the public comment. All interested parties are invited to submit comments to the Board of Aldermen either prior to the date of the public hearing concerning the proposed development plan, including the tax abatement contemplated therein, and to appear at the public hearing and provide comments. All interested parties shall have the opportunity to be heard on all matters addressed in the proposed development plan. Now is the time for that to take place. If you're interested in doing so, just please come to the podium and state your name and your address.
Hi, Lois Truman from 8710 Rosalie. Excuse me. I think this just got answered, but I just wanted to be sure. When the city does the inspections on the new buildings and all of the construction that's being done. I mean, that is correct, right? That the city inspector will be inspecting the buildings as they do other development, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to just assume that. Okay, so when the city does that, if there's a non-compliance, who is responsible? Do they go to Green Street? Do they go to the hotel subcontractor? Okay, that was my question.
This will be treated as any other building permit compliance issue by both the building department and the holder of the building permit, the owner of the property.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? There will be there's a regular public comment, citizen comment, when you could speak on this matter as well. Yeah, next up, in fact. And then
Chris
two times. I'm sorry, Chris.
Chris Thornton from 9421 Tillis Drive. I just want to address a couple things. The first is I appreciate the background on the project because the first thing I did when the master development agreement dropped on the city's website was I looked back at what was presented in June and September, and I wanted to see if the project had changed from June and September to now. And in fact, it has changed quite a lot. Now, it hasn't changed from a physical structure point of view, it hasn't changed from a square footage point of view, but it's changed very dramatically from a financial point of view. And I don't know if you all are aware of that. I assume if Alderman Wege was involved in the negotiations that you are aware of it, but I want to make you aware of some numbers that I pulled out of the numbers that were put forth in the packet that came out in tonight's program, okay? In June of 2022, this was proposed as a three-phase project with a total cost of $425 million. The incentives that were proposed in June of 22 was a 90% abatement for 10 years for a total of $29.08 million. There was also a CID proposed, and the CID was going to generate $15.5 million for a total of financing of just under $45 million in incentives. Okay, that's what was proposed in June. Now, the proposal did discuss the possibility of a TDD. It did discuss the possibility of a special assessment at the CID, but that's the proposal that was proposed in June. By my calculations, that means about $45 million in incentives. That's what they said. The tax, in June of 2023, what we've been proposed is a three-phase project with a total cost of $425 million. The incentives, however, have changed quite a bit. It's a 50% abatement with pilots for 20 years. The total cost using PGAV and data analytics, I can't remember who did the tax assessment. Using their numbers, the total value of that abatement is $58.3 million. If you remember, the total incentive in June of 2022 was $45 million. Here, the abatement itself is $58.3 million. In June of 2022, the CID is proposed again at the same revenue, $15.5 million. And I assumed that a TDD would generate approximately the same number because it operates basically the same way as a CID. Okay. According to PGAV, the numbers that Lindsay just gave us today, the total incentives account for 18% of our $425 million project cost. That number, if you do the math, works out to $76.5 million. 58 million of which is in abated taxes. The abated taxes are the ones that impact our school district the most. Absolutely the most. According to the numbers I put together, which again were taken out of the numbers that came out with this project, I saw $58 million in abatements, I saw $15.5 million in the CID, I saw $15.5 million in the TDD, and if you add those numbers up, that gives you $89.3 million in incentives. 21% of the project cost. Folks, I was here when we started this thing, and we asked ourselves how we could justify borrowing $40 million of the taxpayers' money and going down there and trying to fix the flooding before we could get to this point. And we all said the same thing. We said we're gonna have to be taking a hard line with the developers when the development time comes, because we've already done our part. The taxpayers have already put in their money to this project. We all said it. I was in the room with you. And now we've gone from $45 million incentives to $89 million in incentives in just 1 year. Now, you all have to explain to me how that's a good deal for taxpayers, because I don't get it. I really don't. In addition to that, the money that we spent on the flood control program was mostly used to buy land. The land that's left over that hasn't been used in the flood control program is being donated to the developer free of charge. It's over $1 million worth of property. We're just giving it to them. Just giving it, just deeding it over. The city is in control of this project. That means you all are in control of this project, and you're going to do what you want to do. I know it. But if you're going to try to sell us that this is the best deal going, you're crazy. And we're going to remember your actions a hell of a lot longer than we remember your words. So take that for what it's worth.
Anyone else?
Karen Smith, I live on Harrison. I just want to be on the record as that I'm a resident, not a business owner, and I am opposed to the use of eminent domain. I've said it many times before, but I just want to be on the record at this meeting. I stated that at the 353 meeting, but I also want to state it here. You know, eminent domain was supposed to be used for public use purposes only, and I feel like that we are not using it for that. In this instance, and I also understand that the threat of eminent domain is the use of eminent domain, because you are forcing people to a table to negotiate. It is not the free exchange of property on the open market. I do feel that there are other ways to revitalize communities. There are many municipalities that are around us that have done so. The development, the type of buildings that are being proposed for this project were not part of the original comprehensive plan. I understand that things change. I understand that due to the COVID, you know, like retail offices aren't quite in demand like they were before. But in the many meetings that I attended when that comprehensive plan was built, there was lots of interest in doing things that would be aligned more with the park that was being built down there. And we've got a lot of dense apartments and other things that were not part of that original plan. I did have questions on that Manchester Redevelopment Corporation, which Alderman Sims did answer some of those questions, but I was interested, who will make up that board, and will that board have meetings? It's my understanding that the 353 is responsible for bringing forward a plan to you all, which they've done. They've brought forward the plan. So I'm trying to understand what this other 353 is going to be doing. And again, kind of the same question I think that she had, which is, why aren't we using our Brentwood Redevelopment Corporation? Why are we using this one? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Laurel Zeal, 2646 Ruth Avenue. I talked at our last Alderman meeting. I also talked at our ward meeting last week and extensively with Steve Luckmiller. And I come to the conclusion that this is going ahead no matter what, no matter how. But there seems to be some room for some compromise a little ways. He said nothing's set in stone, nothing's actually been done. I mean, it's not going to be at least a couple of years before they start construction. And there's a lot of things that the groundwork has to be developed for. FEMA has to approve the floodplain, MSD has to approve those plans, MoDOT has to approve the traffic, which was one of my biggest concerns in the last two meetings, because that is an awful lot of people. And I objected to the amount of traffic, because like I said before, you can't make a left turn. Well, one of your people said, well, they're going to put a stoplight at Salem. Well, that's going to let all the people out of the project. I still won't have a way to get across because it's going to continue the flow. So there's no way you can make a left. And it won't be just my street, it'll be others. But I did, in consideration of looking at the plans, have a suggestion for the developer. He has the hotel right across the street from my house. And it's a 5-story hotel, which I strenuously object to, and so did just about everybody on our street that I talked to. But after talking to Steve and in the ward meeting, I had an idea. There is a parcel of land that's currently empty down at the northeast corner of your development. You now have in this last plan, you have a office building set it there. That would be the perfect place for the hotel. It has a huge retainer wall behind it, so 5 stories would not be objectionable stuffed against that. Plus, a selling point to a hotel developer might be the fact that right across Hanley is Metrolink, which gives people that go to that hotel an opportunity to stay at the hotel, get on Metrolink, go downtown and visit any of the venues, sports programs and things. I know people that come into town just to go to the sports ball game. My brother does every year. He lives in Houston. But it also gives them better access to both 40 and 44 going this way. And it would get it away from me and a lot of other people that don't want to see it 5 stories stuck there in the middle of nothing.
Thank you. Anybody else? Now we will close the public hearing section of this meeting, and we will move on to citizen comments. Now, this is the time of the meeting that we have during the Board of Aldermen meeting when you can speak on any matter. What we just had was a public hearing to speak pretty much only on the redevelopment plan and some on the redevelopment agreement. But if you have something else that you want to address to the board, now is the time to do so. It still can be the redevelopment agreement, the redevelopment plan. We just ask that you give your name and your address, and we'll give you up to 3 minutes for that purpose.
I'm still Chris Thornton, and I still live at 9421 Tillis Drive. I just want to address a couple other things that were said tonight. I certainly appreciate Alderman O'Neill and Alderman Shelton moving on. I think they've probably been 4 or 5 board members that have moved in and out while this project is going on. And I'd just like to point out that you are the person who appoints their successors once they take off with the approval of the Board of Aldermen. And so I would encourage this board to give this matter the time it deserves. Think about it a little bit. Look at all the details before we jump into this agreement that's going to keep our city locked in for 20 years. Mr. Oliver said it himself, the market is tough. Maybe that's not the best time to be negotiating a redevelopment agreement. The city is perpetual. It has lots of time. Maybe there'd be a better time to have a mutual development agreement in place. Or maybe we should consider other alternative development strategies. For example, a phased approach of our own, maybe green development. I'm not sure we need another armory in this town. I don't know if you've been there. I've been there. I don't know if we need another one. Maybe that's not the best thing to do. Maybe the best thing to do isn't to build 1,000 apartment units. These are long-term decisions, folks, and I think they deserve long-term consideration. Like I said, I know what you're going to do, but I have to give you my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lois Truman, 8710 Rosalie. I just think timing is everything, and I'm very thrilled that I got to Brentwood in the time, the beginning edge of this, and seeing it all develop. And I commend everyone. Chris Thornton was the mayor when we arrived here in town, and that's when I first started hearing about the flood, the need for the flood abatement, and I got very involved, and I've been involved with Brentwood Bound from the beginning, actually. And so I have a different perspective. My perspective is that these minds that we have as representatives of each of our wards have come together with all the input from their constituents and have decided that it's now or never kind of thing. Now, it may not be that drastic, but what I have heard when I moved here was that this had been an ongoing years and years of people talking about, we could do this, we could do that, we should do that. In the meantime, things were deteriorating, we were losing businesses, the school population was diminishing, and this is all can be documented. So I have a different perspective because I see it as a renewal. I see it as breathing life and keeping Brentwood the gem that we have now that we're living in, and because of those ahead of us that have made it this. And now we have a group of leadership that is trying to maintain that for the next how many ever years. It's not something that I think should be delayed and delayed. It has not been delayed and delayed by this group because you have taken action and have followed through, and I have been part of observing that. So that's where I'm coming from. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Could you say it one more time, Carol?
My name is Carol Jansen.
Thank
I live
you.
at 2446 Cecilia. I've been a resident of Brentwood for,
You can,
Maybe pull it down, yeah.
there we go.
okay,
There we go.
okay. I've been a resident of Brentwood for 72 years. And I hate to see this all being so big. I think that Manchester is not equipped for all the people that is coming in. We're having traffic problems right now. It's hard to see to be this big coming in. I can understand some of it, but it's just too big. And it's just hard to see some of this. I don't know. I would like to see some of it brought down because it is still residential. This area has always been residential and it should stay residential. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Jansen. Anybody else?
My name's Anthony George. I'm a resident and business owner here in Brentwood. So my family's been a part of Brentwood for the last 40 years in business and home ownership. So to your point, it has been a thriving community for a very long time with very successful businesses that have paid taxes, that have supported the community, that have done just fine. Very resilient through COVID, through many other things. The aldermen and the mayor seem very confident about the proposal, and I agree that something has to be done. I think it's good that we want to take action and improve the community. I think that confidence, and I've said this for a year, should extend to the citizens and the residents, and there should be a poll, or there should be a survey, or there should be a vote. And you should, if you're that confident, say, okay, if we get the vast majority of people that want to go through with this project, let's go through with it. Or if you're going to take the recommendations from 5 years ago with a limited amount of apartment buildings, with limited traffic, then let's stand true to what we said in the beginning and not adjust. So I often hear the statement, they were the only developer that agreed. Well, they were the only developer that had you guys bend and adjust the rules of the RFP to include eminent domain. If you were to offer that to the other developers, would they reconsider? Would they be in on the project? If they could get $85 million instead of $40 million, would they be in on the project now? I think these are really important considerations that you guys need to sleep on and consider the perspectives of all the residents, of all the business owners, and of all the people that have supported you guys, the taxes of this community, the police department, the firemen, everybody who protects us. I think it's extremely important to give this thought, as people have said before. Further, I often hear a statement of the value of the road going in of $23 million, $23.5 million for the electrical, for the sewer, for this nice road that's being put in. The analogy I have is I worked for a global grocery store chain. Grocery store chains don't put in checkouts because they want to help the community, just like a road isn't being put in to help the community. A road is being put in so they can traffic people, just like a bag of groceries, quickly down the corridor to make a lot of money. It's essentially an outlet. The traffic study hopefully will show that the area can't handle this, that we need a turn lane, that the turn lane isn't included, many other things. So to say this $23 million is an investment in the community for a roadway, I don't understand it. So somebody would have to explain that to me. I understand that they're paying for the infrastructure, but that infrastructure is to support the sewer, the water of all the residents who are going to be paying the rent that is going to increase the profit and the margins for the developer, Green Street. The RFP, I don't know how and why that changed, but I would like some kind of explanation as to why we wouldn't consider giving other developers a shot at this. If we're going to extend the same courtesy and adjust the rules over time, then I think it should be reconsidered and reopened for other developers. As you said, Mr. Mayor, this is the biggest item in the history of Brentwood, which I don't think there's a rush to pursue this. I think all angles should be considered. I think all of the citizens should be polled and questioned and asked if we're this confident that it's the right move. And it may be the right move, but give the people a voice, give them adequate time to respond, put it out there, and let's see where the chips fall. Lastly, I've asked for help for a year in email. I've had aldermen to my house. I've said, what can be done to help the citizens, to the residents? What are you doing to reach out? What are we doing at the alderman meetings? There's a handful of people that show up. There's a handful of people that speak to these meetings here today. But as servants, in any capacity, we're all expected to help those in need. I've told you that I'm in need. I've told you residents are in need. What do we do to help the needy? As a servant, that's our duty. That's why we're elected. That's why we're quote-unquote leaders. So I ask again, and you can go on record, you can look back to the year meeting ago, I ask and plead, what is our path forward? What is being done for the citizens? What is being done for the residents? We know what's being done for Green Street. We know what's being done for the city, but the people that live here, that pay taxes, what is being done? What is the benefit? So please consider those things as you guys take this all into consideration. I know you've given it a lot of thought. I know it feels like we're at the 90-yard line and you have to push through. You don't. There's other options to consider. There's other people's hearts, families, everything to consider about this. And it is going to affect everybody in a very big way. So appreciate your time and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Karen Smith, I live on Harrison. If you're going to survey residents and businesses, if you would be sure that when you put the options out there, you explain the tools that you're going to use in order to implement those options. So, for example, if you're going to explain, do you want to see a nice new hotel or building or whatever, instead of this overgrown bush or whatever pictures you're going to show for blight, would you rather see that? But in the process, tell them, in order to get rid of that bush, I'm going to take all these other viable businesses that are willing to fix their businesses up using eminent domain. Are you willing for me to put this area under blight for that bush that's overgrown? Thank you.
You.
My name is Martin George. I reside at 2E2A Carrot Bay, United States Virgin Islands, but I'm a commercial property owner along the Brentwood corridor. And I'm going to speak a little bit about timing. So a really great metaphor is in front of my building at the moment, there's a ginkgo tree that's planted fresh, nicely underneath power lines. A ginkgo grows to be very old, beautiful, tall, and robust. It's got a strip of grass that big. It's ridiculous. My brother Anthony speaks about reaching out to the residents, which is valid. The aldermen here for the residents. This project is for the residents, not for the commercial people such as myself. On the Brentwood community group, I was a Brentwood homeowner at one time, 2452 Helen. It was my first house. I loved it. Walked the neighborhoods. In the Brentwood, Missouri Community Facebook group, I asked 2 questions. They were pretty simple. And this is a reflection of time because our markets move fast. In 2010, there was a flash crash that brought things down to single digits within minutes. So you can reset equity prices very fast now. And we talked about that tonight with abatements doubling in the past year. But in this Facebook group, I asked 2 questions. The first was, as a residential voter or taxpayer in Brentwood, how informed do you feel about Green Street? ? If you've never heard of Green Street and their allotted 30-acre plot, respond with not informed. If you are not a voter or taxpayer, refrain from your response. Yet the person in the community had 2 choices. One, I feel very informed. I've seen their flyers, mailings, attended the meetings and meet and greet. The other is, I'm uninformed. Who is Green Street? How did they align with 30 acres? What exactly are they going to do with 30 acres in Brentwood? The poll began to sway with 100 votes into the evening into the uninformed area. 70% so. This second question I asked into the Brentwood, Missouri community group said, as a resident of Brentwood, would you want the 40 acres of flood mitigated land off Manchester between Brentwood and Hanley to be a well-manicured park, athletics, nature, peace and beauty, or additional residential units, multi-floor, large buildings, courtyards? Into that evening, the poll swayed into 98 votes with 85% of your residents asking for a well-maintained or well-manicured park, athletics, nature, peace, and beauty. I was kicked off that Facebook group within a couple hours of this. The essence is, I don't care if I could care less if I was kicked off. The essence is time. This project, I've been in my commercial building with my father since I've been this big. The flood mitigation project is where I felt comfy. And then it morphed. That's called style drift. We talked about time tonight. Time is ticking. I talked about time and money at the last meeting last year, and rates quickly doubled from that. And I talked about rates at that meeting. Your term, Mayor, is done in 2025. There's another point of time. Time has huge value. So along the lines of my brother, Carol Jansen, herself here, a resident for 72 years, noting that this is a good place for a residence is important. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Amy Stanford with Time for Dinner at 8506 Manchester. I'm asking for you all to become aware of how upset the residents and businesses in this area or regarding this area are. We've come to meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's not because we love these meetings, it's because we really are interested in what's going on and trying to save ourselves. And it's not such a huge crowd tonight, but a lot of them have been huge, and we're all trying to ask you to listen to us. And it seems like it should be a project that people are for and can, all be happy about. There's so many, well, the thought of eminent domain is crazy, and everybody that I've talked to has just been appalled. And of course, we are too. So there are lots and lots of things that all of us have concerns about. And for instance, my business, Time for Dinner, if we were to stay in this area, and have a new place with the redevelopment, it's guaranteed that our rent would be 2 or 3 or 4, probably more than like 4 times what we're paying now. And we can't abide, it's not going to work for us. We can't raise our prices by 4 times. It just won't work, and we're trying to figure out how we can survive. We're also a business that needs a parking lot near us because we have customers that come and drive their cars parked near our entrance and get their food, their cooler food full of food, and put it in their car. And from what I can see now, the possibility would be that we would have a parking lot, and that is not going to work because how are we going to carry the coolers to the second story of a parking lot? It just, it feels like we're not really being taken into consideration. And anyway, we would love to know what the plan is about businesses like ours, like Anthony's. Is there going to be any consideration for keeping us viable in this plan, or are we just going to be out of here because we're the little guy? Anyway, we hope not. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we will move on. Mayor and Alderman reports. I have just a couple. Before I get into it, I want to just make a couple of remarks or respond to a couple of things that were raised during the public comment. First of all, the school district. When this first was brought to us, one of the very first things that I did is I reached out to the school district through the board, the school board. I had a meeting with the president of the school board, and I I told her what we were looking at and that there is a request, as we all know. As Chris Thornton said, there was, at the time, it was a request of 90% for a 10-year period. And I wanted to reach out to the school because I wanted to find out their position on this. As you may or may not know, when you talk about real property abatements, the ones that really lose potential revenue is always going to be the school district. It's not really the city. You know, if you looked at if I asked Lindsay to come up here, and I'm not going to, but if I did and asked her, over the life of this abatement, what's the revenue that the city is not receiving if there was no abatement, you would hear that it is substantially different, substantially smaller than the school district, which is why I wanted to reach out to them, because I wanted to make sure that they understood what the ask is of Green Street. And when those changed, when the ask or the request of Green Street changed, I brought the school board back in. They sat in on some of these meetings. And because I wanted to keep them apprised of this, and I wanted to make sure that they understood that they're the ones that are going to be lifting this. The burden rests primarily on the school district. And I want to thank the school board because they are overwhelmingly in support of this project. I can't say that enough because they look at this as a way to maybe bring in some students. They want to grow their enrollment. It's a real issue with our school district. And they look at it also with a way to generate more revenue. As soon as the first real estate tax bill is paid down there on the first building, that's the school district is going to get more revenue than they are getting now. And they understand that, and they need that revenue. And so they have been in support of this thing, and the fact that they aren't here, don't read anything into it, because I can assure you, if they were opposed to it, they would be here, and you would hear from them. They would be objecting to this. They're not. The other thing I wanted to mention, the use of eminent domain. I'm not aware of there being any change in the RFP. You know, it's a blighted area that was always considered eminent domain. Under the law, eminent domain is legal to address a blighted area. That's what the law says. And that has always been part of the process. People also talk about spot redeveloping. It wasn't brought up tonight, but I thought somebody was alluding to it, and I wanted to address it. It was definitely brought up at the 353 meeting. I call it spot redeveloping. Some people try to put a cute name on it, organic redeveloping, but at the end, it's spot redeveloping. And it doesn't work. That's why we're excited to have a master redeveloper come in here and look at doing the whole thing. And for those folks who've been here long enough, Ms. Jansen, you think back to Brentwood Boulevard. And I want you to think about the block from Pine to Moritz. If you look 25 years ago, there were 5 buildings on the west side of Brentwood. So 1998, there was Federer. Is a unique looking building. One story had stained glass on it. Just south of that was a 2-story house that had been converted into a law firm, our building. Next to that was it still stands as a very narrow 1-story building that was used for installation of car stereos. Next to that was a house, I don't know when that one was constructed, it looks like in the 30s, that's used as an insurance office. And then the southernmost one is a 1-story building, it looks like it was constructed in the 80s. In about 2002, a developer came to us. They wanted to redevelop that entire block, Pine to Moritz. They wanted to take down those 5 buildings and take a house or 2 behind those buildings and redevelop that entire block. That's what we call a master redevelopment. And they came to us and said, we want your building, and if you don't sell us your building, we're going to take it through eminent domain. Now, the law on eminent domain was a lot different in 2002 than it is now. There's a lot more protections for property owners now than there was, because there was a change that took place in 2006. So we had the choice. We could either sell our building to them, or we run the risk of whatever happens through eminent domain. We opted to go ahead and take their offer because it was a good deal. Federer did the same thing. The house behind us did it as well. We didn't want to move. We had no desire to move. We had great proximity to Clayton Courthouse, where we try a lot of our cases. We were very close to Highway 40. We could hop on 40, be downtown to the downtown courthouse or the federal courthouse in minutes. It's a great location. We had uncertainty. We didn't know where we were going to go. Now, I know nobody cares about a law firm, but it was a law firm of 5 lawyers who were searching for a place. There was no relocation allocation back then. So we were searching, trying to find something in the central corridor. We even went so far as to find, there's a building on Big Bend and 40 that is occupied by a law firm, and they had 4 offices available. We were going to rent from them. We would have been spread throughout their building. There had been no cohesiveness. We would not have been all together as one unit. We were able to find a building on Big Bend. It sat vacant, and we turned it over. It's 10,000 square feet. It's a far, far nicer building than what we left on Brentwood Boulevard. My point in telling you that is I have been there myself. I have some idea of what people are going through when they talk about the uncertainty of this, and I absolutely sympathize with that. But really the reason for me to tell you about that is I want you to, if you have a chance, drive by that tonight after the meeting and look at that corner. Look at that block, because those 3 other properties south of us didn't sell, and the developer did not force it through the use of eminent domain. So a bank came in, bought our building, Federer, and a house. Those 3 buildings came down, and they put a brand new 2-story brick building there. The 3 buildings south, they're still there. That one store that I told you about that was installing car stereos, it's still there. It's never going to be redeveloped because it is so small. It sits on such a small lot, it's impossible to park it. You can't get adequate parking for that. They're grandfathered in on everything. To have any change on those 3 other buildings, you have to put all those parcels together. So that spot redeveloping that you hear about, or green redeveloping, it's not the godsend. It doesn't always work, and more often than not, it doesn't. Because the parcels that a developer are going to want are the corner parcels, the high visibility parcels. The middle of the block ones, no. But with a redevelopment agreement, we can force that. We can say you're not just doing the corner parcels, the high value spots. You have to do the ones in the middle as well. So I just wanted to give a little counter to this discussion or these positions that you've heard about green or spot redeveloping. The other part, completely unrelated to that, we had a holiday yesterday. Trash has been pushed back a day, as you all know probably. And we also, because this is such a wonderful city, any storm debris that you have, we are picking it up free of charge. Just bring it to the curb, put it in your tree lawn. You got big branches or whatever, throw it there. And we are picking it up until July 11th, I think is the last day. So it's just another wonderful amenity that we are able to provide the residents. So with that, I will turn it over to Alderman Plufka.
Thank you. I was just going to talk about the fact that we have a Ward 1 meeting next week, but I'm going to make 4 just quick comments. And I'm really sorry that the former mayor left after his comments, because when you say things that are factually inaccurate, it is nice to let them know that they're being factually inaccurate, and he was on a number of points. One of which was that he suggested that we were giving the public land away to the developer. We're not, in fact. In the agreement, there's $1 million called for the developer to pay the city for the public land that remains, that's not being utilized in our flood abatement plan. Secondly, he suggested that there would be a diminishment, and it would hit diminishment in tax revenue, and that diminishment in tax revenue, especially related to property tax, would be very harmful to our school district. In fact, as Lindsay has said on more than one occasion, and what PGAV, who is our contracted consultant, has said on more than one occasion, because of the nature of the abatement, there is a floor. There will be no reduction in the baseline taxes generated by this property through the life of the abatement that goes to the school district. Now, because of the abatement, the school district may well see an increase, and actually Lindsay's projecting a substantial increase over the life of the abatement. But there will not be, and will never be by this plan, a reduction from where the taxes are right now to where they would be at any point during the development. The one question I had, and I can save this and ask you, Lindsay, when we get to the discussion and questions, I don't know how to square the math that he had put together with regard to the delta between 88 million and 76.5 million, but I suspect you're going to have an answer for me, and I'm going to ask you to try to do that. Last but not least, to the comment that was made tonight about the fact that, hey, why don't we let somebody other than Green Street have access to eminent domain, and we would get dozens of other developers. In every single RFP, the first two that went unanswered, and in the third one that finally did get answered by Green Street, the same mention of eminent domain was made in every single RFP. And what PGAV has told us on time and again occasion, it's not the use or lack of use of eminent domain that changed the deal for so many other developers who were possibly going to make development proposals and then did not. It was the fact that the city did not control all of the property down in that area, and that they were going to have to negotiate with individual owners, and that was going to be too hard for them, and they decided to pass on making a pitch to the city of Brentwood. That's my report.
Thank you. Alderwoman Tice.
So I will report on the ward meeting. Ward 1 will have a meeting next Tuesday, July 11th at the Community Center at 6:30. And as we did last week, we want to have another opportunity to talk to residents of Ward 1 about the plan and specifically this time the agreement. So we look forward to seeing residents of Ward 1 next week.
Alderwoman Sims.
Thank you. We will have a Ward 2 meeting on the 10th at 6 p.m. We will be specifically talking about this development. We're earnest in wanting our constituent feedback. So please come, and we're going to do our best to answer your questions, address concerns, vet this out. Our July Ways and Means committee meeting is still TBD, bottom half of July. But so once we have a firm date, we'll be posting that on our regular websites and other notification venues. So that's my report.
Thank you. Alderman Weggie.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you probably forgot this one, but on July 8th, on Saturday at 10 a.m., we will be dedicating a monument to the Evans Howard. So this is a neighborhood that was a predominantly black neighborhood. It's a fascinating story, and we need to pay better tribute to this neighborhood that was there and basically gave itself up. So that will be at 10 o'clock on Saturday. Alderwoman Sims mentioned the ward meeting on July 10th. Public Works has canceled for July 13th. I will be on vacation, and we don't have anything pressing. But on July 12th, one of the things we've been working in Public Works is some changes to our infill housing. So as bigger houses are coming in on smaller lots, how do you make sure that the overflow, overland water, all these things are not causing a detrimental effect to your neighbors? So if you put a large house, it doesn't flood out your neighbors. So we have several proposed changes that we've been talking about in Public Works over the last year, and there will be an information session on July 12th at 5:30 here. And really the intent is to get feedback. I know all the builders have been invited to get their feedback about what impact these would have on them and get their, puts on it. And I think these are important changes as the city continues to grow in our residential areas. We really have to get a handle on this infill, and this is a first step on that.
Thank you.
That's it.
Alderman Lockmuller.
Well, I'm going to let Alderman Gould talk about our Public Works meeting, but I wanted to just add to your points about the school having representation. On the 353, which has forwarded this plan on, as well as the tax incentives, they have a representative. After a 4.5-hour meeting, I don't know if he's coming back, but they voted yes to forward this on to the full board.
Thank you. Great point. Alderman Gould.
Yes, so the Ward 3 meeting that was originally scheduled for July 25th, given the timing that the mayor has requested for the second read of this redevelopment agreement, we are going to move that to next week or I'm sorry, yeah, next week, July 11th. So it'll be at the same time as the Ward 1 meeting at 6:30 at the Rec Center. We will be in room A. So I encourage everybody to come to that meeting. We'll likely have a few other agenda items as well, since that will be our July meeting, and then the following meeting will be in September. So again, we've moved it to July 11th, 6:30 at the Rec Center. I also want to remind everybody that the Parks Master Plan Survey is still active and will be active through, I think, the end of July. Is that correct? So please go on, if you haven't done so already, go on the website, look for the Parks Master Plan, Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and then take the survey so that we can get as much input and data that lays the foundation for all of the amenities and services that we offer for the next 25 years or plus.
Great, thank you. Alderwoman O'Neill.
Because Alderman Shelton and I will not be in office when our reports are normally given. We're not going to have a ward meeting, and we'd encourage everybody in Ward 4 to visit Ward 1, 2, or 3 for ward meetings.
Great idea. Thank you. Alderman Shelton.
Yeah, I just want to quickly kind of touch on what the mayor had said about the timing, and we thank you, first of all, and apologize that the timing we put you in, but life goes on, and, you know, for better or for worse, Ward 4 sometimes, and not to anyone's fault up here, but Ward 4 kind of gets left behind, right? It's a condo community, the residential part, but there's 1,425 units. There's a lot of kids who go to the school district. There's a lot of people who are involved, and we thank the mayor for giving us the opportunity to vote on this and be in the discussion, because Kathy and I have been in the meetings, and we've put in the time, and we've met with the Brentwood Forest community, and we've talked with them, and we have an idea of what they're looking for. So I want to thank you and appreciate that.
Thank you. Brings us down to the consent agenda. We have 3 items. Are there any requests to remove any of those items or any questions about any of them? If not, can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
And any discussion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Plufka?
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice?
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderman Weggie?
Yes.
Alderman Gould?
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
Yes.
Alderman Shelton?
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 8 to 0.
Thank you. And that brings us down to new business. There's one item, and that's bill number 6468.1. Can we get a first read by title only, please?
Thank you, Mayor. If you and the board will indulge me a bit of housekeeping before I read the bill, we're going to read this as Bill 6468.1, which is in the board's packet. But because there was a 6468 circulated and available to the public, we want to distinguish it by introducing it as the .1 version. The difference is that there is a new 4th prefatory clause, whereas, and makes reference to an analysis by PGAV about parcel by parcel consideration of the property. And we're also going to read this as Exhibit D, although you will see on the text it refers to it as Exhibit 4, but we already have A, B, C, so we're going to change 4 to D and correct that typo on the final version of the bill. So with the board's indulgence, we will introduce this as the first reading of Bill 6468.1, an ordinance designating a certain tract of land in the city of Brentwood, Missouri as a blighted area pursuant to Chapter 353, Revised Statutes of Missouri, approving the Manchester Road Corridor Redevelopment Area Development Plan, approving a development agreement in connection therewith, authorizes certain actions in connection therewith, and containing a severability clause.
Thank you. And since we've already had the presentation, we're not going to repeat that. We're just going to open this up to the board for questions. Alderman Lockmiller.
Could I ask Joel with Green Street a question?
Sure.
Joel, how about that suggestion? I know that area, where the hotel is now, but where that section close to Hanley Road, originally you guys had proposed an apartment building there, but now it looks to be office. Did you look at possible hotel site there?
So yeah, I think there's several things to think about. It was an interesting idea for sure. So as we talked about, we have a relationship with the hotel developer, and having that in phase one, kind of that portion of the project is important for kind of the sequencing of how the whole project works. They also, as far as kind of the amenity concept goes, they like where they currently are just because of the connectivity to the other pieces, the proximity to the park, some of those other things. We did not talk specifically about that corner. It is a question we could have with them. The way our agreement with you is structured is if we wanted to make a change like that after, an agreement may eventually be signed, we could approach the city and have that conversation. My gut feeling, having worked with them on many projects, is they would acknowledge that the large retaining wall behind would block the building from that. Half of their units would also be looking out at a huge retaining wall versus the beautiful park we've been talking about. So I don't know that they would be terribly excited about that. But we're always open to having any conversations. I think as staff will tell you, there's been 1,000 iterations of ideas of how about this, that, there, where, and we're always open to having those dialogues.
And then, I'm not asking for any names or locations or anything, but would you be open to a possible owner currently as maybe a sub-developer of a certain parcel?
A current owner in the footprint of the redevelopment area? Yeah, I mean, so the concept would be, the way this is structured is that any developer out there could approach us about, sub-developing anything. The goal is to have a conduit that there's cohesiveness to everything. So you don't have a chicken plucking farm, between apartment buildings, right? I mean, that's the idea. So, and I believe the agreement actually contemplates that concept of if somebody wants to do that, kind of the mechanism of how they do it. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Alderman Plufka. Can I ask a question, Lindsay? So it was brought up during public comment that doing the math between the proposal of June 22 and June 23, essentially, not quite exactly, that Alderman Plufka, is your microphone on? I'm sorry.
it is. I
Okay.
guess I'm just not.
I just couldn't hear
Well,
you.
nobody's ever said they couldn't hear me. So how do we explain, or how would you explain the delta? You had indicated that it was $76.5 million of incentive, as opposed to the against the $425 million of investment, making the 18%, which is what is in your materials. The question that came up, did the calculation, I know didn't know about TDD, I guess, and was guessing at TDD, but therefore concluded that there was $88 million of incentive rather than $76 million of incentive, moving their return over 20%. So because I'm just asking, do you agree with that math, or what would you say to that?
Sure. So I understood his comment to mean moving the percentage of TDC above the 18% that is in the materials. I will say that I was unable to follow his math. And that's not to say that it's not understood that all these parts and pieces are part of the 18%. It's that these calculations are extremely difficult and complicated, and not something that we did on the back of our hand during a 20-minute meeting. I personally have been calculating based on analysis from Green Street's financing models, as well as Development Strategies Tax Impact Study, since January of this year, looking at various versions, various financing models, various interest rates and abatement percentages, and each one of those assumptions has a multitude of assumptions within them, right? It's what the tax rates are, it's what type of abatement, what the current assessments are on those properties versus what the future assessments will be. So these are all analyses that we've run in multiple ways in order to come to this, what seems like a really simple statement of 18% of total development cost and what that calculates out to. What I can tell you is that that 18% is made up of the property tax abatement and the CID and TDD 2% total. And so the tax impact statement that is on the public record, that is posted on the city's website, has the amount of the no build versus build scenario for all 3 phases. You can read through the 26-page report. The public has access to it, as well as all the appendices, and it calculates each one of those property tax abatements and each one of the phases. And on top of that, we've done an assumption of sales tax, and then what that 2% new tax, the 1% for the CID, and then the 1% for the TDD on top of that. And that gets you to that total 18% of total development cost.
Okay, and
Could I interrupt and ask, if you would, please, Lindsay? Earlier, you said that your calculation also included the value of the sales tax abatement on construction materials, correct?
The 18% of total development cost does not include the estimate of Chapter 100 sales tax exemption.
thank you. This is the first time you've done this on behalf of a municipality, this type of analysis?
This specific type of analysis, yes.
Okay, and
I will say, though, that PGAV Planners has been longstanding, decades-long consultant, and I have been doing this analysis in close contact with Andy Struckoff, our president, as well as John Brincaglione, who has been working for the city of Brentwood maybe longer than Mark Grimm.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Anybody else? Alderwoman Tice.
So I have a question, I think, really for Mark. Could you, I believe it's in Section 5.2 with the city's right of termination. It seems pretty simple, but could you talk about what happens, like if Green Street did half of Phase 1 and then stopped, or they did all of Phase 1 and they're like, yeah, we're done with Brentwood, we're leaving you with Phases 2 and 3?
The question came up earlier about the role of the redevelopment corporation, and it's an oddity, I'll call it, in the statute, in that in order to trigger tax abatement, title has to pass through the redevelopment corporation, which under the redevelopment agreement occurs after completion of the project. And so the developer only gets tax abatement for completed buildings. And so whether that's all of Phase 1 or whether it's half of Phase 1, or that is what the trigger is for tax abatement. If the developer never pursues something beyond Phase 1, then there's never tax abatement. The city has the ability, if the deadlines in the redevelopment agreement aren't met, if the developer otherwise defaults in the terms of the redevelopment agreement, the city can terminate the redevelopment agreement as to all future phases, all future aspects, and the developer will continue to receive abatement on completed buildings, but not on anything in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so then I have a couple questions for, I think both for Joel. So the other week in the paper, I read something about your new project just, I guess, west of the Armory, and it's made mention of in the Post-Dispatch that you had $608,000 in 22 real estate taxes that had not been paid to the city. So could you address that? And
Sure.
Is that something we should worry about with pilots or something later on?
No, so we wouldn't normally comment on a specific thing like that. It was in the paper, though, so happy to address it. So you're talking about the historic famous bar building that is next door to the Armory. So that is a building that we relatively recently acquired. It was fully tax abated when we bought it. Had been and are in conversation with the assessor. There was a disagreement on the valuation, so it's the kind of the normal process of working through the reevaluation with them, which has materially worked out now, and we have a good path forward. We are happy to announce that just got listed on the National Historic Register of Historic Places. So we're going to be able to save that building and kind of turn it into something really cool. So we're excited about that.
Interesting. Thank you. And then this came up at our ward meeting, but in the RFP that you did, there was lots of great stuff about sustainability, and you sort of as a company believe that, but none of it's really in the agreement. So how are we to be assured that sustainability is part of what happens in Brentwood?
That's a great question. So I'm not sure how you would kind of legalese that into an agreement. The way we think about it is really municipalities and counties, kind of governing bodies, are who update their codes to generally embrace those things. So, if you look back 10, 15 years ago, LEED was kind of the standard people used. That was kind of the gold standard. And that was because at that time, municipalities didn't really require those things. So it was a huge lift to get to that standard. It was really a big deal. Now, as things evolve, more and more people kind of put those regulations and requirements in place. Outside of cities, there are now financing sources that kind of have those things, partners that require those things. So for us, that ebbs and flows and always gets more stringent in a good way, which we think is kind of how it should be, having higher requirements for people. So if you made it a static thing in a document like this, and then the city updates its code, we're already required, kind of beholden to the city's requirements or the county's requirements or the state of Missouri or the federal government's requirements. So I think that's generally how I would think about it. So I think you kind of have to look at our past and our history and what we say is important to us, what we actually do, and that's part of it. So,
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Gould.
I've got several questions, but I'll try to just focus on a few at a time here. One is related to the density of residential multifamily and also the hotel. And it's been brought up to us several times. You've heard it here tonight. Even in almost every ward meeting, we have a discussion about the master plan that was put in place, the comprehensive plan that was put in place by PJV for years, at least 2 comprehensive plans. And understandably, that's sort of a bubble chart of, hey, this is what could be there. It's not building by building what specifically could be. But one thing is fairly clear from the residents, and I think Alderman Plufka at our 353 had some concerns, which I echoed, of the plan itself, and as it relates to, we have continually asked, and I have continually asked at almost every meeting, could we reevaluate the density? Totally understand that I think our city is losing in population. If you look at our population studies, every year we've actually dropped a couple hundred residents, or 100 residents at least a year for the past 3-4 years. I'd like to see that kind of change. So I think some residential is a good thing. I think everybody who has talked to us agreed that the 55 plus active adults seems like a good addition to the community. I think where we start to lose it, though, is this plan the right plan, is when there's a hotel added that, honestly, every conversation I've had with every resident says either they're completely indifferent because they don't think it's that big a deal or they don't care, or they're just dead set against. They don't know why a hotel is necessary. And so, I don't have a good answer for that. The point is that I don't think there's anybody that's like, I can't wait for a hotel to be added in there. Everybody wants to see a good mixture and a good balance of redevelopment. Everybody wants to see, I think, some new residents infused into the area. I think the big question becomes density, how much is too much, and obviously traffic. So I'm curious on the plan why we haven't seen a reduction. We actually have seen an increase in the condos, right? So it used to be townhomes, now it's condos. Those actually increased. So it seems like we're kind of going in the opposite direction, even though you did decrease the number of keys in the hotel. And so has there been an option to look at? And I think you've mentioned that if there is no market study for a hotel, or if they can't find a hotel provider, then you would come up with something else. I mean, tell us your process.
There's a lot of questions.
Yes,
so
I know,
let me do
I
my
know.
best to try to weave them together. So I think it's hard because people like to look at individual pieces. So I'll talk about the hotel first. If you own a home in Brentwood, you're probably not going to stay at a hotel in Brentwood. That's true. The office users that we are working with on this project really want a hotel. Large national firm, professional people who do well, and they bring people in. That's one user. They probably don't want to locate here without a hotel. That's true. If you live on a side street, do you care about that? You might not. I'd ask the same person though, are you buying a Porsche? Like, did you show up and say, I don't want a Porsche dealership, right? I mean, like, so not everybody in a community is going to use every building that's built.
Sure.
You know, if there's a tattoo parlor in Brentwood, not everybody's going to go there and get a tattoo, but you're not going to show up and say, I don't want a tattoo, right? You might, but it's a low impact user. I've actually never in my entire career had people so opposed to the idea of a hotel, especially an upscale hotel that's very nice and would be a fantastic amenity for the community. The reality is if we get to that point and our hotel partner says, no, we're not going to do a hotel, it changes a lot of things on this plan. And then we'll be having a conversation with you, and that will just be what it is. I don't have a better answer than that of the hotel. So it's really been surprising to me, the feedback we've gotten on that front. More academically, and your question on the apartment side, take the opinion piece out of it, because everybody has their own opinions, and they're not right or wrong, they're what they are. Academically, it is not a dense site. That is academically a factually true statement. 16 apartments per acre is incredibly low density. Go look at Brentwood Forest. I'm dead serious. I mean, everybody keeps saying, God, this is so dense, this is terrible. Like, it's just not. That's just academically incorrect. There are 3 buildings, and the market will dictate that. If that first building has a hard time leasing up and there's not demand, we would come back and say, we're not going to do another apartment building. And guess what? If it's wildly successful and you guys, this is great. We have places for people within the community to move. We're bringing young people in. It's vibrant. We love it. That's great. Let's do it. Then we'll do it together. If I was standing here saying we're going to build 660 units in one building, which people do that all the time, I would think that concern is justified. I do not think the way this plan is laid out justifies that concern. And adding the condos is an exact trade-off from the lowering the hotel. It's not exactly the same thing, but overall conceptual density is the same. I would tell you 34 sale condos is going to have much less of an impact than those other uses. You know, and those are for sale product, which has people, you know, invested in the city and the area.
Which I think is feedback that people said they wanted to see more for sale so that it's not just transient rental units, but they become part of the community. So I appreciate you actually taking that bit, and I appreciate your feedback on it. I guess the question that I have as it relates to the hotel in the redevelopment agreement is on page 20. Let me get, sorry. Bouncing around, not going in order. Sorry, not page 20. I can see my comments. In part of the redevelopment agreement, there was a, maybe it's 15.
Alderman Gould, while you're looking for that, can Alderwoman O'Neill?
Yep.
She wanted. Did you want? Yeah. Just turn on your mic. Thank you.
I'd like to go back to the hotel issue. As one of those people who lives in the very small post-World War II housing at Brentwood Forest, when we have visitors, we need hotels. It's the one place in the city where we don't have room to have family or guests come and have a group of family with us. So we use hotels. In October, I had family come from the US and Canada, and I had not realized how many hotels I have within 7 minutes of Brentwood Forest. There are at least 8. And when I first saw a hotel in this property, I was surprised because I couldn't see why we needed one more hotel. I think the idea of having a 5-story hotel is something that makes me feel very negative about this project. I don't think it's needed. I think other apartments, moderately priced apartments and condos would be far preferable as far as getting new people here. But I truly am with people when I hear them say, and everybody in Brentwood Forest has said, why do they need another hotel? So if you had looked at what's around us, you might have looked at it differently, but I can understand why you want it from a revenue stream. But as a user of local hotels, this would not make one whit of a bit of difference to me.
So remember, we're not developing the hotel. We have a partner that's developing the hotel. So it's not purely revenue driven. It is putting together a cohesive plan that supports the whole thing. I'm not going to get any love for this comment because I'm at the Brentwood City Council meeting, not the Unified St. Louis Council meeting. This is where St. Louis hurts itself. We think about ourselves in a very isolated little boxes, and we don't think about ourselves as a region. I live in Webster Groves. Where's the closest hotel for me to stay? Or in Kirkwood, or in Ladue, or in Rock Hill, right? You do have options. You have hotels on the highways, which appeal to a certain kind of traveler. A lot of people that go to Clayton stay in your hotels. That's absolutely true. If my in-laws come in town from Kansas City and they want to stay somewhere, they maybe don't want to stay at a hotel for a business traveler that's kind of a medium grade hotel. They might like to really stay at an upscale hotel that doesn't have a highway and highway noise next door and has all of these awesome restaurants and things to do in your beautiful park right next door. So is that a regional draw for St. Louis County? I would say it is. Does that bring revenue and tax dollars here? It does. Does it support all these other things we're trying to do? It does.
Alderman Gould, are you still on the density issue?
I am, I guess, on the question that I had regarding on page 20 was, would you entertain a market study added to the redevelopment agreement so that this, we could, if there was a market study that proved the region actually can support it, then that's a condition on whether or not the hotel is built. I mean, I guess you're going to do that.
The heavy hand of the private economy will dictate it more than you ever will, because a hotel flag won't go there if there's not demand. It's just that simple. They're not handing out free hotels in areas that they don't think will do well, right? They want it because they believe that there is a void. And if we get to that point, and there's not, I'm going to come back and say, something's changed. Our hotel partner no longer believes there's a market for this hotel to go here. Let's work together to have a replacement use. Is exactly what would happen.
Which is great, because it takes me to my next question as it relates to that. In the redevelopment agreement on page 4, section 3.3 at the very end, where it talks about phase 1, you talked about the 172 multifamily units, approximately 30 townhomes, and approximately 136 key hotel, or in lieu of additional multifamily rental units and or commercial space. That or in lieu of is, I'm guessing, is in relation to if you don't find a hotel developer to build a hotel, you're asking for the potential of adding more additional multifamily rental units?
The city added that provision, not me.
Okay. I mean, I would recommend that we, given the fact that I think you have a very good explanation of density of the apartment buildings that are presented currently, but I don't see, if we don't do a hotel, I don't think that we need to have a provision in there that allows them the condition to be able to put more multifamily units. So, Whitney, if you wanted to.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to actually ask Whitney to come on up and address the issue of density, because I know it has come up in the past.
Good evening, Whitney Kelly on behalf of the City of Brentwood. It has come up in the past, so I did a quick analysis. When we're looking at Ward 4, when we did our census update earlier this year, there was 1,986 residents in the ward. Brentwood Forest is approximately 105 acres. So that equated, the St. Louis County notice equated that area to 1,450 units, which is approximately 18 people per acre. The Green Street is 660 units over 40 acres, not including the area for the park. That would be approximately 16 and a half people per acre, or residential units per acre. If we did include the park and accounted for all 77.2 acres, that would equate to 8.5 units per acre for the whole area. So, so in my view, I didn't think that was a dense population. The lowering of density would significantly impact the ability to attract businesses to the area and offer sustainability of those businesses in the long term.
And you included, is the rationale behind including, I'm sorry, Alderman Gould, if I can just.
Go ahead.
The rationale for including the park in your analysis, was that because that is already in the redevelopment area?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
all part of the redevelopment area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question about the redevelopment agreement, whoever added the in lieu thereof additional multifamily rental units, I'm perfectly supportive of, and I think all of the residents that have come to our ward meetings and talked about it, even the ones that have some issue, admit that there needs to be some redevelopment especially on the south side of Manchester, and they want to see more commercial, retail, mom and pop. They want to see restaurants and cafes. So I think the in lieu of a hotel, if it can't be built, additional commercial spaces is totally acceptable. I wonder if we need to put in additional multifamily rental units in this contract.
I mean, that is ultimately y'all's decision, but I think the mix of uses is what is attractive to most people. To creating a vibrant, walkable neighborhood is the mix of uses and creating people that want to stay and live in Brentwood as well. So adding the option up to the board and for the developer to weigh those analysis in the future based upon the market and what is needed for the area and what is driving the development is needed for the agreement to.
And the way this agreement is written, they would have to come to this board anyway to have a discussion about what would
Correct.
be replacement.
Just to remind everybody, each building would still have to require the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Aldermen approval. So they would, if they wanted to pursue more housing units, that would be part of that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Alderman Gould, are you still
I'll
you
let
done
other
for now?
people- Yeah, I'll let other
Okay.
people talk.
Alderman Lockmuir. Oh, I'm sorry.
Whitney, you just mentioned each building will have to go before planning and zoning.
Mhm.
Can you kind of go through, just for the audience and everyone listening, what that entails? What traffic studies, lighting?
Yes, we do the traffic studies, the landscape. We have our on-call engineer to analyze any traffic impacts and provide feedback if adjustments are needed. Our landscape architect provides review to ensure landscaping meets with the requirements of the city or recommendations. We also get into the architecture and design and how it's all laid out. We review everything against the zoning code and any redevelopment plans like the Manchester corridor, and how all of the projects would work together for the internal roadway and how they would each get phased out.
Would the traffic study be global as far as, I know it, would you be doing each traffic study per building? Or how would that, as it progressed, how would that look?
It would be probably a combination of the both. We would want to look at it universally, especially with any shared parking that is being proposed between the different uses and different buildings. But then we would also look at each individual one. Now, if there's also a use, like restaurant, that requires a conditional use permit. So we would also look at the parking for the entire court, for that immediate area around it. So if there's shared parking agreement that's needed for the adjacent parking, shared parking with the apartment complex, that's where we would get into those discussions as well.
And then some of these taller buildings, there's a lot of HVAC equipment. The restaurants have their own exterior fans, exhaust fans. Is there ever a noise study done for any of these?
I haven't had one done in advance except for at a prior job where there was a noise study completed for a car wash. For AC equipment, that is something that we can certainly look into at the time of each building. I haven't had any complaints regarding AC equipment on general office buildings, so.
On schools.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm just, with the topography down there and the fact that these buildings, a lot of people will be looking down on some of these buildings, I'm worried about noise generation from rooftop equipment. So if we could watch that, it'd be nice. Thank you.
Alderman Shelton.
Can I, sorry, you good? Can someone just walk me through, so Joel had mentioned that they're open to the possibility of hotel partner not included, somebody else partnering. How does that process work then through our planning and zoning process? Does that, Green Street ultimately have to agree, obviously, to partner with it, and then is it a Green Street project with this other developer, or?
Yes.
And it's still within all of these parameters that?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Alderman Weggie.
Whitney, while we got there, and I hate to put you on the spot, that density calculation you did for Brentwood Forest, what was it per acre?
Well, there was 1,986 residents according to our last census. So I quickly did a area calculation of Brentwood Forest, and that was 105 acres. And so the St. Louis County website said that there was, for public notice, there was 1,450 mailing addresses within that area. So I would equate the 18.88 people per acre at the 1,986 divided by 100.
Okay, and then you mentioned, so restaurants are a conditional use in Manchester, that's per the MC zoning that we did?
Yeah, they're conditional use in almost all of the commercial districts.
Not only if they have a drive-through, but any restaurant is a conditional use?
Correct, I think, so. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Alderman Gould?
Oh, yeah. Make sure that the comment I have I can reference it for you all. On page 13 of the redevelopment agreement, 3.2, subsection B, subsection 2, there's a clause in there that says if the development demonstrates in reasonable judgment of the Board of Aldermen that retaining all or a portion of existing improvements is in the overall best interest of the city, and that the improvements to such property upon completion will be aesthetically consistent with the remainder of the redevelopment project within the redevelopment area. Does this mean that when and if we approve a redevelopment agreement, there would be a time period where there would be some inspection of existing buildings that would be much more detailed than what Green Street or anybody really could do at this point, and that on further inspection, some may be able to remain or even remain but improved in order to kind of stay in the district?
Excuse me. So it kind of goes to the sustainability question, and you're exactly right. The problem is we don't know what we don't know. Right. So we've been in none of the buildings, right, except for what you maybe would have been in as a citizen. So not knowing what we don't know, the concept was if there was something that made sense, because it could very well be the city who came back and said, we want you to try to save this building for some reason. We just didn't want the agreement to be such that that wasn't something that could even be contemplated. So.
Okay.
I think the point is it's at your discretion, either way.
Okay. And then the next, on item 3 of that next, you talk about the public infrastructure and water, sewer, electrical infrastructure improvements on both sides of Manchester. One of the things that as we've redeveloped or redone Manchester Road with a partnership with MoDOT, seeing a lot of the electrical lines down there kind of isn't the greatest. Does your plan, in any of it, when you do electrical infrastructure redevelopment, does there any plans to bury any of the electrical, especially when you look at a major redevelopment on the south side? Is there anything that could
So that's a great question. By far, the most preferable option is to do that. And it is aesthetically more pleasing, but it's also kind of from a liability perspective better. You know, a tree falls, it's not going to damage a line underground. The reality is in St. Louis, it's astronomically, insanely expensive to do. And we once again don't know what we don't know. So before you actually go in and start engineering what that all looks like and working at the Ameren on those new lines, it's kind of impossible to know. To the extent that it is feasible to do, it would be our preference for sure. I can tell you anecdotally, we did a project that completed last year, and to put, it was about 3/4 of a block underground was many hundreds of thousands of dollars for one half block run, right? It's just, which is mind blowing. So the other benefit of having district level development like this is you can cohesively look at it, and then the cost may start making more sense than when you're trying to do it for a building.
Sure.
It's just nobody can ever do it. So it's something that we've committed to evaluating. We get to that point to be able to do it. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Take your time.
Aaron also told me we are not looking at doing a chicken plucking factory, so I just wanted that on the record.
Okay.
That's
If
not,
nobody else has
it's not currently on the plan.
more questions, the new concept that you added in is interesting. Seemed to me, and there was some mention of it, I think it was in the redevelopment agreement, that there was similar to what is being done in Milwaukee, that, you know, there's multiple, let's say, vendors or businesses contained in an experience. You know, do you envision that being an opportunity for some of these smaller businesses to maybe have access to the district, but maybe a little bit more controlled rent that allows them the ability to have, you know, open up in an area that maybe they couldn't before?
Yeah, I think there are two questions there, I think. That would absolutely be something we'd evaluate. I think if you, once again, looked at our portfolio of things we've done, specifically in St. Louis, is much more centrically driven towards local, smaller businesses, and it's not big chain, rinse and repeat kind of deals. So to the extent it's feasible and doable, it's absolutely an option, right? You would like to work with people who are here and proven. And not to address specific comments made earlier, but there was kind of a concept that, you know, a destination entertainment concept, this is not needed, right? There's already one in the metropolitan region. We've been doing a lot of really interesting kind of macro level ways at looking at St. Louis as a region. And if you look at us compared to what people always call peer cities, St. Louis as a region outperforms almost all of them. So if you look at median household income in St. Louis, the only borough in New York that beats us is Manhattan. We're higher than LA, right? We're higher than, but people say peer cities, right? We actually have generally higher income and a lower cost of living, which is why we're going to be the smallest city in the country with 2 Topgolfs. Why is that? That seems like a lot, right? Chesterfield's not that far away if you live in the city. It's because people want things to do. People want that experience. People want to go somewhere and have that stickiness. Now you're going somewhere and you have dinner, but there's kind of nothing else to do. Or you go somewhere for a concert, but there's nowhere to eat dinner, right? So we believe the central location here of that concept works great. The reason it was originally in phase 2 is because it was a year ago, right? And the Armory wasn't open yet. We were a little pensive. We were trying to figure out what exactly was going on. We're a year later now and have kind of seen how the market has received that and believe that it'll be phenomenally successful. You know, another developer opened the factory out in Chesterfield, and people said, oh God, you can't put another music venue and you're gonna kill, you know, the Sheldon and the Pageant, these other places. It's not right? I mean, the region can support those things. So we're pretty bullish on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I don't think your intent is to recreate the Armory. The Armory is pretty unique in itself.
It cost $1 bazillion to rebuild that building.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I'm excited to see, you know, multiple uses, multiple opportunities for lots of different things. And I think addressing even potentially a almost farmer's market type of feel with lots of different, you know, I mean, you see them in Philadelphia. There's some really great areas that near some of the old train stations that they've taken over, and there's lots of different cultural aspects. Something like that, I think, is unique to this, is missing in this region.
No, for sure. We do a fair amount in Wisconsin. I'll tell you, every time I bring people through the Milwaukee airport, we stop downtown and go through their public market. You know, people like to talk about Ponce and some of the other ones, and I think Milwaukee really did a phenomenal job on that.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah.
a big and
So
incredible.
I applaud you for listening to that feedback. I applaud you for looking at it as sort of an entry into the district from the, especially from the residential area, but even from the region, people who want to go to the new park that then can enter into it. I think that's, you know, you heard that and you did address some of those concerns.
And we were thoughtful just, you know, about not cannibalizing the park. We don't want to offer something there that detracts from that experience. And we believe the programming of this would not do that. It really is intertwined in being something that benefits each other.
Thank you.
Nothing else? Alderman Waggy.
Hey, Joel, can I, just for clarification, so where we are on the condominium, so those would be for sale units, so those would not be rentals?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, we would sell them. I mean, I guess somebody could buy one and rent it, but it's not being built as a for rent product.
Would individual people be buying the condominiums?
Like you could buy a 2-bedroom condo, and if you chose to rent that to
Correct, but
Plufka, you could do that. But
when you say
we're
for
not
sale,
building them
it's
to rent them.
two-
Correct. Our
two
intention is to sell
individual
them.
buyers, not
Absolutely,
for
yes.
sale to another entity. Okay.
And
then-
part of the reason that we have 3 buildings there and not one building with 30 units, it's the market responsiveness, right? You want to do one, create that sense of place and home for people, and if it does very well, you do it. And guess what? If all 30 of those are so well received and phenomenal, we would come back and say, like, well, this was an unmet demand. This was great. People would like this. Maybe we look at doing more somewhere else. The point being, though, you have that opportunity. You're at the table with us. It's not us coming back and just telling you we're doing it.
Okay, and then the change on, you know, building A, as I call it, the far west one there, is it still the thought that part of that parking lot would still be available for public parking for the park?
Yeah, so it was a really fun exercise for the architects, right? And looking at this, because there's a lot of ways you could site that building. The one bogey is we still don't know exactly how the topography lays out, you know, so knowing that in the back of our minds. A couple of the options, though, really kind of messed with the parking lot. I was like, no, I think that's right. But it's important to have that real flow-through connectivity with the park. So this is parked contemplating that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Shelton.
Joel, can we go back to the condo? So I am Ward 4 after the condo association was created. So when you're developing a condo complex, how does an association, would you expect an association to be formed? Would you form an association? How does that, who would then have their own bylaws saying, no, you can't rent these, or a certain percentage can be rented?
What you're saying is right, yeah. So I would envision one condo association that would govern all 3 buildings, and they would have the bylaws that you're talking about.
And is that something you establish when you build these, or how does that?
That is generally how it works. When a developer does that, they put the condo association in place. But like, as you know, the condo association then governs itself. It's not us.
Correct, but
'cause
you
we
would
don't own any
establish
of the
it and then
units.
turn it
Yeah,
over.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? They will be back in front of you all on July 17th. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
Just
ahead.
a couple of small little
No, go right ahead.
little questions. On page 22 and page 23 of the agreement, when it talks about the certified public accountant, the first one in C, item C. I'm
Alderman
sorry.
Gould, is that section 5.3C
Hang on, it's
on page 23?
no, not 23. I
Oh, okay.
wrote down the wrong page. It's actually page 19. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
So the certified public accountant one, I guess the question is who pays for that certified public accountant? Is that the city or is that the on the developer? And then specifically on that particular provision, upon the sale of a redevelopment project, is there a reason why a financial professional is only selected by the developer and not developer mutual selection, as it is when we do the appraisal on the next section?
You want to answer that, or would you
I don't
want
have
Mark?
the, I don't have the agreement in front of me, so I would actually let Mark.
Yeah.
Well, The developer would select I mean, at that point, it's math. And so the developer will, as opposed to the appraisal, as you know, is more subjective. And so we felt it was important that both parties mutually select the appraiser, but the certified public accountant is basically just performing math. Now, the city has an opportunity to review and approve / or object to that and raise questions about it and get all the backup data. So if they think that there's been essentially a math error, then the city wouldn't approve that. But that's why we distinguish between the appraiser versus the CPA.
Okay, okay. So as it relates, and just for the public's awareness, we're talking about the quote-unquote clawback
That's right.
measure that's in there. So again,
And I shouldn't have said just math because I can't do math, okay? So, but it's more objective as opposed to subjective.
As opposed to subjective. But when it gets into the appraiser, again, whose responsibility is it, even though we are mutually sort of agreeable to the appraiser, who burdens the cost of that appraiser?
Well, and so the document, the developer does.
Okay.
Yeah, the developer bears that cost.
Okay, because it wasn't, really clear in the language to me. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so.
No, I believe if it's not clear, then we'll put language in. But that
Maybe just check that.
I will check that.
Okay. And then as it relates to the workforce housing, which is listed at 21, if the excess return pilot comes back and in lieu of a reduction in abatement, there's potentially a reinvestment into the workforce housing product. I guess, are those workforce units to be, in quotes, created from a percentage of the units that would already have been built?
Yeah.
Constructed versus, another building that's isolated throughout? Because I think the intent is that they would be, you would never know what's a workforce house or not.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it was sort of spread throughout the area.
Yeah, so just remember that provision is triggered on a building-by-building basis. So if that were triggered, it'd be triggered on a specific building. So that inclusion of those units would be in that building. And you're absolutely right. There's no distinction in the built product of what is a market rate or workforce. They're completely interchangeable. So you could say that one is, and that one is, that one isn't. And then people move out and then it flip-flops.
Flip-flops, yeah.
That's
so, because I do think, there is we agree with your assessment. You're the ones that brought the product to the table. And I think there is a concern about housing costs in Brentwood, and especially for teachers and firefighters and police, can they afford to live here? So, I think having the ability I think it's really important for everybody to know, having that pilot, excess return pilot, in the redevelopment agreement, which is somewhat rare, gives us the opportunity to have those discussions and try to get some of that available.
Yeah, I would tell you it's double rare because the clawback provision itself is a huge give that makes a lot of sense here. But then going a step further and kind of tying it to that, I've never seen that ever. So I think it was a good way to achieve kind of the objectives.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Remember, we are going to be taking this up for a second read on July 17th, at which time there will be more opportunity for the public to comment and more opportunity for the aldermen to ask questions. Do you have your hand up, Alderman Bufka? No? Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
So if there's no other questions, then we will move on to the last item, which is citizen comments. Once again, if you care to address the board, now is the time to do so. We just ask again that you just come to the podium, state your name and your address, and you'll be given up to 3 minutes. If not, then we have a request to go into closed session pursuant to RSMO 610.021 subsections 1 and 12. Can we get a motion to that effect, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Plufka?
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice?
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Alderman Weggie.
Yes.
Alderman Gould.
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Yes.
Alderman Shelton.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 8 to 0.
Great, thank you. We will take a quick break, then reconvene. What was it?
Closed session meeting.
Recording stopped.